Welcome.
Right?
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining. I know we'll maybe have some more people joining, and then we look forward to kind of getting this webinar or this web episode out there. So we would love to open it up. Guys, feel free to throw questions into the chat, raise your hand. We'd love to answer questions and kind of go into what's going on in the industry and answer questions and have this a really interactive episode. So Ray, I'm super excited to not only have you on the breach report, but to kind of interview you a little bit. We've known each other for how long? We known each other?
Got to be 12 to 13 years, somewhere in
Yeah,
there. I knew
long
you
time.
before you were even fit. You were
Yeah,
unfit.
that's right. Yeah, before Fit, long before that, when I was an engineer. And
Yeah,
why don't you go through just real quick a little bit of your background, how you kind of got into law firms, and kind of your career trajectory over the last 20 years.
sure. I started off actually after the Navy. I would start off as a word processor in a law firm. And then I was a legal secretary for about 6 months and finally moved into a systems job because I was actually literally let go from a job as a legal secretary because I was too busy fixing the computers. And I was told, quote, "We don't need a computer guy, we need a secretary." A month later, they called me back, but I already found another job. So I got into systems in law firms and then just kind of grew up in law firms. So from assistant systems coordinator to IT director, CIO of my own MSP, and then back into IT director roles. I've kind of been in a lot of different scenarios, and I've seen the growth of IT in law firms from what it was in
Right.
the 90s until now is 100% different, and the complications are just off the chart. So I'm glad to be here, and I did want to make sure everybody that's on the call, because I know some of you guys, make sure everybody knows I'm not a cybersecurity expert. So I'm just an IT director in law firms who's, like you guys, been through a lot of stuff, and so we thought this would be a great opportunity to walk through some of those gotchas and
Yeah.
some of those issues that we should all just kind of be aware of. So
Yeah, I think you're selling yourself a little bit short there. So when you the
always,
first firm you worked for was, what was that, Sullivan Hill? Was that
yeah,
your first one?
yeah.
Yep.
Well,
And then
well, before that, there was even a couple other small ones, but that's the first IT job. Yep.
the IT job, and then you were at Higgs for quite a while as
Yeah.
well. So that obviously had to put you through a lot of paces. So
Yes.
what
As Tom knows, there's a lot of paces there.
yeah, definitely. So what were some of the things that, like, if you kind of, you said there was a lot of changes. What were some of the big things that you kind of noticed were changing, and what were like the things that stressed you out the most, kept you up at night when you were, you know, uh trying
First
to make sure
starting.
the organization was, yeah.
Yeah. First starting. I mean, honestly, for those who've been in this industry for 20 years, your biggest issues weren't really on the cybersecurity front at all. It was more systems being up, people being able to get work done, which is still, our number one concern today. I remember at one point, I noticed Craig jumped on the call, so I'll call him out there. But he and I worked together, and we had a long discussion about, what's the most important thing in law firm IT, and this has probably been well over 15 years ago, and it was systems uptime and user support and all that. Cybersecurity wasn't even on the radar. But over time, it's one of the things that is still not on a lot of people's radar, or is only in cursory manner, like checking the box. We have this documentation, we have this plan. But back then it was just systems uptime, keeping things up, making sure things are working, and that's all you focused on. And there's a lot of IT guys in the area that do not make that shift to, well, now what do we have to do?
Yeah. Yeah. So you were part, I know you for a while you were running kind of the ILTA group. Tell us a little bit about that. And what were some of the trends you were seeing when you were, networking with a lot of IT directors of law
Well, there
firms in
was the
that?
initial phase of denial. Law firms aren't big enough. I'm not a big enough, target. Well, the small law firm that works for a big company is the ideal target. So a lot of what we saw was just the awareness. We went through a long period of time. There's one firm, popular firm, multinational firm, that got compromised. And immediately after that, that sparked a lot of conversation. In ILTA, it was like literally, I think, a month before the big conference. And so at the conference, everyone was just buzzing, talking about it. And after that, literally every firm that had a cybersecurity initiative got it approved. So it was kind of nice. But it was
what was the breach that happened there?
Um, that was the big firm with the three letters that everybody knows. They had built a system where every office could access every bit of data in every other office, and the
Okay.
speed and the slickness of which they could have that access turned out to be a big problem when they got ransomware. It could spread through site to site. So that's when we started evaluating: do I really need to have universal access to everything? Or do I need to be a little more granular? I think that was kind of the start, at least for law firms, that more of a zero trust mentality, least privileges. Do you really need to have access to this? What's the big deal if you have to authenticate one more time to get to this, sensitive piece of data? So
Got
that was an exciting time.
did when that happened, like what were the things that you did like right away in your organization? Because were you at Higgs at that time?
Yeah, and I think
And
the
then
first thing was to get my cybersecurity initiative to have a managed services security provider on the ticket. That was my number one. But no,
okay,
it was establishing multi-factor authentication and
okay,
making sure, because that's the other big gateway in. A lot of people weren't doing it at the time. It seemed like oh, it's not really needed, but that would have limited down a lot of the access if they had that in place. One bad set of credentials can ruin everything. So that was the first thing I think we focused on. But there's a bunch of kind of defense in depth steps we took, and that was one of the first ones, is making sure everything's got two factor on it.
yeah, yeah, that's pretty good. Now, one of the challenges that I know pretty much every internal IT department has with law firms is dealing with the partners because they just want to bill, they want ease of use, they don't want any inconvenience at all. And things like
Mm-hmm.
two factor, zero trust, super to their in their eyes, it's a really big deal of inconvenience and they don't want to deal with it. Like, so how did you kind of overcome those challenges and what were those conversations like?
Yeah, that was I think the biggest thing was, and it sounds bad, but don't let a crisis go to waste. If somebody else is struggling with something, it's in the news. You have to find the time when people are focused on an issue. Yeah, there's a monthly spend to have a security system. You have this tool, you have this tool, all this stuff adds up. And partners, they at the end of the day, they're practicing law to make money, and every bit of money that's not spent on overhead is money in the equity partners' pockets. So you kind of have to appeal to them on that level, like you don't want to lose this. So there's a few different things you have to do. I think the biggest thing was for me was, when something happens, make sure you hear about it, not in an alarming, kind of Paul Revere kind of way, but just make sure they know, like, hey, this happened, this is in the news. We don't want this to be us. Here are these cybersecurity initiatives I think we should do. But also finding, I feel like you'll always have at least one or two partners that can be your champion. It's like you need to have a partner talking to the other partners, kind of helping push these initiatives through. Because if you don't have them, if you're sitting there stonewalled by a group of litigators that don't get what you're trying to do, it'll be hard. So you got to find an internal champion to kind of help you with that stuff.
Yeah.
And the other part was just, you take it in steps. I remember one law firm where they came with this giant initiative. You do something huge and you're going to pitch something that's going to cost, double your IT budget 1 year. Guess what's going to happen? It's going to get denied and you went nowhere. So you need to be a little bit more, I don't want to say defense in depth, but you kind of do your phases. We're going to do this first, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and then get those things approved as you go. So I think that kind of helps, because if nothing else, at least do this, or if nothing else, at least do these two steps, even if you can't do all 20 you want to do. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, I like that. Stephen McHugh said client audits fix those issues now. I mean, we've kind of seen that where clients are coming with their list of questions that they want
Yeah,
answered. And
that's another good driver. So it
it's a
could be,
huge driver. That's huge. So we've, a lot of times they don't know how to answer a lot of those questions because it's about, how backups are handled, data is handled, monitoring, permissions, things like that. They'll kick it over to the IT. That's a perfect example where you can say, hey, look, here's all the yeses that we do. So I would highly promote what you're doing because you need to promote because obviously every IT department any good IT department is working really hard and probably has a lot of those checks. So I would use that as promotion. Hey, look, great news. We're doing these ones, but here's the ones that we can't in good faith say yes to. And this is why. And that might be an opportunity, because if the client's big enough and they don't want to reply a no to a client that they know is
Yeah.
probably have issue, they're going to want to make the change. And then suddenly some budget might appear for that.
One of the questions that they ask in those audits, preferably one thing I think I know in the ILTA community, we all kind of share those back and forth, like, hey, I got this new audit from somebody, and this is the kind of questions they're asking. Like, what do you think? What do you guys? Because what happens is those questionnaires from clients have morphed over the years. They're getting a lot more in depth, and they don't want to just see, like before, you could be honest, like, no, we don't have that right now, but we're looking at it right now. They're like, well, we'll do business when you do have it, so they're asking more questions, they're asking better questions, and they're wanting to see actual samples or proof that it's in place. So yeah, that's another big push. So it's finding somebody else having a compromise where you can piggyback on that. We don't want this to be us. It can be client questionnaires coming in. It can be something happening in your own environment that's kind of an aha, got you kind of thing. So again, not to be an alarmist, I don't think the people that go in and are those alarmists ever really effectively get what they want to get accomplished, but still making sure that you're bringing these things up, having these constant conversations about them. So yeah, thanks for that, Steve. That was good.
Yeah, that was good. Eric kind of added to that. He said deliverables include risk registered board decks and journey maps. So that's
Yeah,
huge.
they're not just
Another,
asking for you to check boxes anymore. They want to see actual proof that you're doing what you say you're doing.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So another opportunity that I know, this is kind of going into like a whole separate conversation, which is cybersecurity insurance, but usually once a year, there's time that now those cyber questionnaires are becoming way, way more in depth. Like there
Mm-hmm.
used to be like no questions, then it was like, a few questions. Now they have like really in-depth questions. And I've even seen one insurance provider run their own external vulnerability test slash pen test against the customer's environment. So it wasn't internal, it was just external. But even so, the fact that they were like kind of rolling up their sleeve and like poking to see what they could find was pretty telling of where the industry is going. And so, when you're filling that out, that could be another opportunity, not only to be like really honest, because that could come up if there's ever a claim in there that they, don't deny you for some reason, but that's another thing. Go to the decision maker, say, hey, look, we don't have this. Like, it's either gonna mean it could mean different things. It could mean that they don't want to cover you. It could mean that the premium, they will cover you, but premiums go up, or maybe the payouts aren't as big. Like there's a lot of different things there. So GRC tooling, great for organization, quick for attestation. Nice. Maybe throw a link in there. That'd be great. I think everyone would enjoy that. So
Oh, real
one
quick, I
quick,
did want to point out, because I think that was
yeah,
one thing we had talked about before, is um, policies and cybersecurity insurance, and having those. I mean, having all the best policies in the world isn't really going to protect you, right? It's really just more on the HR back end. Can you fire a person for breaking your policies? And the same thing with cybersecurity insurance. Having the insurance isn't going to help you in a breach. It's not going to recover the goodwill lost to your clients or potential clients when you get breached. It's just, can you recover some of the things? So some of those things, again, I don't look at those as an internal IT guy. Those are good things to have, but they're not going to protect you. Really, what comes down to protect you, that's what the in-house IT staff is focused on.
yeah, that's really good. So how were you when you were kind of in this role? How were you from the IT perspective as kind of the leader of the IT department? And then obviously you had to take this to the decision makers. How are you weighing risk versus usability, or risk versus cost?
That's a good one. That was the somebody once said, I think it was at an ILTA conference, somebody said that technology left to technologists would become unusable, right? Like, we can, by our very nature, complicate the bejesus out of something to where people can't use it. So there's always this risk versus usability. Lawyers need to be able to work from wherever. Okay, well, that's going to present a risk, but the usability, the billable time, the getting things done for the client is huge. So we need to figure out. So for everything that you do on one side, you need to do something on the other side to help protect it. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
back in the day, you have everything inside one office. You could do lockdown, Fort Knox, you have to be in the office to work. Those aren't the days anymore. So it's everywhere. So yeah, every time you're opening something up to make it usable for your lawyers, you have to counter that with something. So that was always, I would look at that in a tit for tat kind of thing. We want to open this up, but if we do, we're going to have to protect it with this. And if you're approaching everything from that risk versus usability, if we want to be able to use this here, we're going to have to at least minimize some of the risk by putting something in place on the other side. Acceptable risk conversations. Yeah, exactly. But that's the thing. If you want to be able to work from wherever, and these last few years, oh my gosh, like if you weren't doing that, being able to work from anywhere, um, making the transition on the fly, there's so many people that did it and didn't do it securely because they weren't having those conversations as they go. So if you are one of those that like we weren't ready for working from anywhere, we had to quickly deploy working from anywhere. Going back and addressing those security concerns that you opened up by doing that, that's probably, well, maybe too late, but good time to do it now.
Yeah. What are some of the best practices for remote workers maintaining the security? What are some of the best practices that, like, from your perspective, Ray?
Um, okay, so I think the first thing is obviously you want them preferably working on your devices. So the one thing that law firms have that a lot of like our company's a little bit different. Law firms, almost everybody is holding on to client data at some point, right? Whether it's in your emails, documents you work on, whenever you're holding on to client data, if you're a bank holding it, there's always these other organizations that you're answering to. You have this higher ethical responsibility to protect that data, right? So not working on just personal devices, but only working on firm owned devices, being able to control those devices, making sure those devices are clean. The simplest thing, and I think somebody once said that the biggest preventer of cybersecurity issues is just preventative maintenance, making sure you're patching, make sure you have good antivirus endpoint detection, something like a CrowdStrike or one of those. It's monitoring everything that's happening on the endpoint that they're working on. And then I know you can't completely stop them from getting onto Outlook, outlook.com from some other laptop, but you can limit down to where you can't actually download data on those. So conditional access rules inside of Azure. There's so many things that I think are at people's disposal that they don't want to take the time to learn, but they're really not as complicated as they seem. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
two-factor authentication, using firm owned devices whenever possible that you have control over, and then good hygiene, making sure you're keeping your systems patched so you're not susceptible to the latest vulnerability. And that includes all the endpoint systems. The places that stuff's coming in from is going to be the individual attorney sitting at a Starbucks somewhere.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And then just, as people are so much more mobile now, I know a lot of law firms, it was, and some still are, they want everybody. We work with one law firm, and they want everybody in the office, but I think most law firms are now having to get to the point,
Softening.
even
Yeah.
if the plaque is on the wall, they're really not in there that much. They're kind of at home or on the road or the golf course or wherever they're, working from. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like monitor those behaviors, and just being able to see strange behavior that's anomalous, right? 99% of it's probably okay, but it's that one that you want to capture. um So we had a question in here that I'd love to get a little bit into, which is thoughts on breach counsel as it pertains to attorney-client privilege. So this is one that I've got the opportunity to work with, and I hope I'm answering this. But sometimes attorneys will have clients that their client is had a breach, or there's a cyber incident of some sort, and they now need to figure out the situation, and they're the legal counsel for this outside entity. In those cases, the role that we played is we came in as cybersecurity experts to kind of figure out what happened in the environment, or to help lock down the environment and assess what happened. I think the big important piece on that is that we were hired by the attorney and not by the attorney's client. So we didn't, the attorney did, we communicated through the attorney, and we never at any point um, divulge our findings directly to the organization that the attorney is representing. We always divulge it to the attorney. We give them the reports. They then can present it to the client with us or without us on the call, but then that would protect it under attorney-client privilege. So where it got into really murky waters is if like the attorney brought us in and the client paid us directly versus the attorney paid us, or maybe the attorney paid us, but then after the fact, the CEO is like, well, what did you find, Mr. Engineer, Mr. Cyber Expert? And they're like, oh, this is what we're seeing. Like now we've already kind of pierced that attorney-client privilege veil. So it's really important that everybody on the team really knows, it's not that we're being secretive, it just must go through the attorney. So we're like, absolutely, we're going to get you that information. Let me talk to Mr. Attorney, and we'll set up a call, or we'll get you that report or whatever it is. Then we communicate that to the attorney. The attorney then delivers the results, and that way, at any point, if there were to be, worst case scenario, this goes to court. There's we're called into question for expert witness. It's like we're not dealing with the client. We're dealing directly. We are counsel to the attorney, and he's brought us in as an expert in that breach. So I think I hope that answers that question. But I think most attorneys probably know that a lot better than I could ever explain it. I just kind of, that's my what we had to
Attorneys
deal
would
with.
they'd spend another 2 hours and bill you a lot for it and write you a really long document that'd be hard to read. That's yeah. That was a better synopsis of it.
Yeah. So that was a big one. And yeah, that's good. What do you see happening in the law, in this industry, this year, next year? What changes do you see happening when it comes to, forward looking with cybersecurity, with law firms, and what they can be doing to help lock their environment down and just make sure their law firm is tight?
Well, again, like I said at the beginning of the call, as I don't pretend to be the foremost expert on this stuff. I'm just an IT guy that struggled with stuff like everyone else. But one thing is for sure, that everything that we do, every movement we make to make things more secure, work better, get better policies to, view the random activities and keep track of things, the more the bad guys are stepping up their game. So the biggest thing I think, or the biggest threats out there, are more the traditional things, just in new ways. So what I mean by that is ransomware is still going to be an issue. But I think what we're seeing is there's people who are in your environments that are in there for a year, and they're being very patient, waiting to write that just the right time. Like the one instance between two law firms, that happened to be on this call. We had an instance back and forth with an email that it was a third party small firm based out of, I don't know, Ohio or somewhere, that was monitoring emails between two law firms. And me and the other guy are both like, I'm not compromised, you're not compromised. But somewhere along the way, that email thread was monitored for months. So just the right time. So discussions came in about the agreement, the settlement agreement, and where would they wire the funds. Then here they come scooping in, send it to me in Mexico. We're like, what? Luckily people sniffed it out, but it's just the people on the bad actors, they play the long game in a lot of times, where you don't even realize they've been in your environment for a long time, monitoring, seeing everything. They're not always after you, the law firm, they're after your clients a lot. So the biggest thing I see is people just need to take on those simple hygiene steps, put in multi-factor authentication on your Office 365. Everyone's like, move things to the cloud. It's a lot more secure. Not more secure if you're not putting, security measures in place on those. You're just making it more universally acceptable. So I think what I see from my perspective in the future is they're going to stay one step ahead of us. We'll never be, what's the saying? Like, if somebody wants in your environment, you won't be able to keep them out. It's just a matter of putting up enough blocks, barriers to not be the low hanging fruit, right? So somebody comes by and knocks on your doors and shakes your windows, tries to get in, they can't get in, they move on. But if somebody wants to break in and they camp out and they're there, you want to make sure you're building in enough safeguards to where the simple guys aren't going to get you. The more complicated, you're never going to be able to spend enough money to completely keep out everybody, but at least make yourself not the low hanging fruit and accept that there are smart people out there that are trying to stay one step ahead of you. Partnering with a company that can help you. That's the other thing, is realizing what you don't know. So part of what I did at Higgs was sign up for managed security services. I can't have a full-time SOC analyst on my inside my environment in my IT staff. So realizing that's a limitation I have, finding somebody to help me with that, and then just making sure the tool sets you have are actually working. Just buying a tool, saying you have a tool, is not the same as that tool actually protecting information. So evaluating those tools. The tool you bought 3 years ago may not be the best in breed today. So I think those are the things. It's an ever changing evolution. That was a
Yeah,
good
and it's
non-answer, wasn't it? Just kept
no,
going.
that was good. No, and that's I think how our relationship started is you as the client, and now you're on the team, which we're super stoked
Yeah.
about, and been great for us. So so one of the things that I kind of wanted to touch on, something you said, was like, you can't, if someone really wants to get in, keeping them out. And I think that's a good approach, good mindset, because it's about like being able to know also, not just, yes, you want to prevent everything you can, but if they have a stolen credential, even with two-factor authentication, we've had scenarios where someone got their Apple ID, they logged in with an iPad in a different place, so they were able to authenticate their own. They had the
Yeah.
stolen credentials for the user account. They also had the stolen credentials for the Apple ID. So then they logged in, and from the messenger, they could, you know, approve their own login.
Yeah.
But we were able to see that happen because it was out of a strange a city that this person had never logged into before. And then we kind of started digging in, and we said, hey, how did they authenticate themselves? This is weird. They were logged in at two places at the same time. How is this possible? And then kind of figure it out that way. So I think also just having um, human resources, like if you got a village that you're trying to protect, you don't just need guns, you also need people to have the guns, right? So it's kind of like you
Yeah.
can't only rely on the tools, you also have to have that human aspect you know to leverage it. So that was pretty cool.
Oh, and
um
the one other piece that I just kind of, with all this talk about AI and all the stuff it's doing, I feel like people get AI and machine learning kind of a little confused, but it seems like as we progress, the more we can, I mean, others are going to be using the technology, the more we can triangulate, is that the right term, but taking information from multiple data points, right, and analyze them. And I think that's one of the things that we try to do here, at least, is make sure if we're seeing this, we're seeing this, we're seeing this, those things together raise enough flag that somebody can look at it. You could easily get swarmed in alerts, and then what's the saying, if everything's important, nothing's important. So making sure you have, whether it's an AI based, machine learning based type of a system that's synthesizing all this information and then letting you know, alerting you of those important things that you need to look into further. Lots of times they're not. We send an alert to the client, they're like, oh yeah, we know about that, that's fine. Yes, that user really is in Russia today, something like that.
yeah
But if they didn't know, it's gathering those different data points. You logged in from the US and you logged in from Russia. 10 minutes later, are you really in both places? Well, yeah, we're using a virtual desktop, so it is. We're getting it from Russia and then virtual desktops in the US. Okay, that makes sense. But just finding those different data points, they may not mean anything on their own, but collectively they mean more. So
Yeah, no, I like that. One question was about like purple teams emulating attacks and how to tighten up the network environment from that. So that's a really good point, because you typically have red team, which is like the penetration testers. Then you have the blue team, which is the defense, and it's great to have them working in harmony, because you want a pen tester, as they're testing, you want the blue team to actually be responding to that and seeing
seeing it.
Do
Yeah.
they actually notice it? Is there alerts being generated? If no, then you maybe not getting enough event sources, or the tuning is too tight, and you're not getting enough false positives, right? So you're kind of balancing that. And then the purple team members typically kind of like do a little bit of both, and they're, they're they work with the red team, they work with the blue team, to kind of marry the results together, and also during the testing process and so on. So a good example is on a vulnerability scan. Say you run like a Nessus or Qualys vulnerability scan. um, you'll have the high, medium, and lows, and we've seen that in a lot of environments, when we actually do a true penetration test, not external but internal, when you do the internal piece, there's like 3 lows that when used in combination, you can grab the administrator password hash on a lot of networks. Like, I'd say it's probably like 60% of the networks were able to grab that administrator hash. But if you were just kind of only, if you weren't actually doing that true test, you were only relying on the vulnerability scan, they would show up as lows. And as the internal IT person, yes, the lows are important, but highs are way more important. So I'm going to focus on those. But it was really the 3 lows used in conjunction that
Mm.
allowed the administrator hash to be compromised. And so it's just kind of, I think it's really critical as part of the cybersecurity strategy. You wouldn't build a house without an inspector. And if you did, if that process wasn't part of the house building, there could be a high risk that something might be wrong with that house. And so the penetration process is, while you're not doing that every month necessarily, maybe you're doing vulnerability scannings every month, having an annual or a biannual, kind of like building out what the risk profile is, and then figuring out the right strategy is super important for that.
Yeah, and I noticed there was another part of that question that Eric had asked about what threat actors CVs are common. CVs are common in the legal space. And I feel like the legal space is just the same. So there's the targeted threats where people are coming after you using more, and that's more social kind of, at least from what I've seen. Just got to preface that. But the random scans, if you have an IP that's public facing, you're going to be susceptible to all the same stuff that everyone else is, from log4j to just denial of service. You just, so having the right hardware in place, making sure it's patched, I mean, that was the biggest thing, is whenever there's a CVE found that they come out of patch for, just staying vigilant on those things. Being in a state of continual, I want to say like DevOps type of a strategy, but to some degree, your environment is always in a state of flux. And so many times lawyers, especially, they don't want to change anything. I just want to do what I've been doing. I can't have this downtime. You can't bring it. It's like, you have to have this stuff built in. Regular monthly maintenance, keeping things clean. You're less likely to get hit by these things if you're just keeping good hygiene. So
Yeah.
to that point, I feel like it's all of the above. And if you have purple teams trying to emulate those things, just whatever's hot in the news usually tends to be within the first, I'd say, week to month of these things coming out. That's when all the posers out there are just trying to do the same thing. Hey, there's this exploit that's been publicly available now. Boom, it hits everything, and we see it. We see the traffic.
Yeah, Log4j has been a great, like, a lot of people don't really understand the full implication of like what
Yeah, that was
happened
a good
there.
one.
It was so big. So many businesses were compromised that what people don't realize is that a lot of organizations were infiltrated, and but criminals just didn't have time to do anything with it. They just had a foothold. And so
They just
now on
checked to
the
make
dark
sure they
web,
could.
they'll sell you access to companies they already have access to that they just didn't have time to do anything with. And so they'll, like, before you could, like, on the dark web, buy tools like, hey, I need a ransomware tool. Now you can actually buy companies that already have a foothold in, and they're like, here's your access. We got access.
Here's my portfolio.
We haven't even got around to it, doing anything with it, but here you go. Take a whack at it, and I'll sell you it. So that's kind of just crazy, um, to think about, that someone might have an access to an organization, whether it be a law firm or
Sitting on
something,
it.
And the criminal just hasn't had time to get around to it, and now they're selling it to another criminal that might have some time or interest to try and do
Scary.
something with it. Yeah, it's pretty
I
scary.
think we're over time, so I want to be respectful of other
Yeah.
people's time here. This is good conversation though.
Yeah, we got too deep into it, Ray. But hey, I
It'll
appreciate you
happen.
coming on and having this conversation. And we thank everybody that participated and got to listen live. And then for all the listeners that'll listen later, if you have any questions, we would love to answer them for you. Please reach out anytime. And have a great Wednesday, everybody.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank
Good to see
you.
some of
Talk to
you.
you soon. See ya. Bye.